So hi everyone, welcome to our very first virtual field trek for our social entrepreneurship class. So today we're going to get introduced to the environment around our campus and continually ask the question of what's the state of it? Like, what do we think about the environmental state of our surroundings where we all go to school? So before getting started, just let's get a sense of what's going on right now. I'm here at good old friendly Drexel Park. You can tell that on a spring day it's pretty sunny, not a lot of activity. Tell me when you could be here in the spring semester and find parking spots on both sides of me that open. So is that freaky or what? Here I am, April, spring semester, nary a student to be found. Totally odd sci-fi moment that you need to watch from the comfort and safety of your own home, because we're not allowed out here to meet for classes and stuff. So in and of itself, that's a social and planetary commentary on where we are in life right now. So social entrepreneurship would take us into things like, what do you do about a pandemic, and what do you do about the social problems and the environmental problems? So that's a course unto itself. So back to where we are today. Let's go take a walk. We're gonna walk over there. You guys probably all recognize in the distance, that's the art museum. The art museum's closed today, just like everything else. But we're gonna go to the hill that sits on, which is called Fairmount. So that's our destination. But rather than making a beeline that way, we're gonna walk through campus a little bit, then we're gonna cross over Market Street and take a walk up the river. So what that's gonna do is it's gonna set us up nicely to kind of talk about, what is the state of stuff in and around the campus where we all go to school. So as we meander through the city, I want you to regularly be asking yourself, what are the state of things? Drexel Park, this grass, is that healthy? It's fun to play Frisbee on. Is that a healthy environmental place to be? Look across the way. Look at all that ground. It's dedicated to nothing but trains and train warehouses. Okay, that's going to take us right to the heart of campus. What about that? Is that the best use of that space? Is that good environmental planning that's going on there? What's the state of the health in the air around us? What's the state of the health? Center City's right across the way. Look at that building cluster. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Or is it neither? What's the planning that's behind that? So a social entrepreneur would go around and ask him or herself questions like, hey, what's going on there? What's the design thinking about that? Who benefits from that? Who doesn't benefit from that? Is this beneficial to most of the people that are either living or working here? So these are the kinds of things that we're going to ask as we just get a sense of the state of things with or without the pandemic that's going around right now in our campus and the area right nearby. So join me on a walk and see what you think. So I'm standing in the ghost town, formerly known as Drexel University's campus. Not a lot of activity around here. So I just took a quick walk from Drexel Park down 32nd Street, and I thought I'd show you all a few things at the edge of our campus. So just to my east, look at the expanse here of Train Yard. So you might have heard Drexel talking about Schuylkill Yards and some of the plans about that. Only a tiny little piece of this, closer to the actual campus, is slated to be the 14 acres that's going to be called Schuylkill Yards. But there's a lot more than 14 acres near where I'm standing. So it's not a recent dream that people have had of taking this area, which basically separates West Philadelphia from Center City, Philadelphia, and turning it into something other than a mono-use, which is basically like a place for trains to hang out. And this has been a train yard as long as anyone can remember. And it's not new thinking when people say, if we could somehow cap this and build some city over it, or maybe build some park space over it. But it's not an easy thing to do. In 1964, I found an old newspaper article that actually talked about the Philadelphia Phillies relocating a stadium to this site, to this actual site. The idea, can you cap over where the trains are and build a stadium? Look at all the space you'd have for a stadium and for parking and that kind of thing. It never really went very far. And periodically, there's been talk, including talk from our own president, John Fry of Drexel, about how cool it would be to do something where this became a livelier spot than just a train yard. Well, where I am right now, I pass it all the time, and symbolically, I have a little social environmental dream. If you can see between the trains over here, you get a little peek at some green. And if you wanted to get an even better peek of what it looks like from above, we're basically at 32nd and Cherry Street. So if you put that into Google Earth or a similar app, you could get an aerial view of where we are, and you'll find that over there, let alone there's one other place further down, there's this patch of what looks like grass and trees and stuff. And that's just been sitting there. There are not trains on it, and there's actually like a mini habitat there. And over the years, as I've been at Drexel, I've thought, how cool would it be to just give people a taste of what you could have over here if you actually did cap it and kept the trains underground and extended living and city life and nature and that kind of stuff over the top. But you could totally go back up on Cherry Street, and you could basically kind of build a ramp, and you could ramp it up over the fence, and you could connect over to that area, and you would probably want to construct an elevator setup on the other side so that anybody, whether they're capable of walking or whether they're not, would have free accessibility to that space. And so what do you do in that space? You build the Connector Cafe. That's what I've always thought about. How cool would it be if you put a cafe there, with good drinks and good food, use Drexel culinary students to kind of make the food, and you create a place to grab a drink, to grab a bite in the midst of the Amtrak tracks. It would invite people to dream a little bit about, hey, what would it be if we actually capped this whole thing? But it would actually be a connection, and there's a lot of talk with Schuylkill Yards helping inner city communities, and I'm not quite sure yet how that's all going to play out in this area when this whole side that's connected to Drexel's campus is totally gentrified, and most of the areas of need are further out the other way in Mantua. However, there's nothing like connecting to a spot with a neat bridge connection, inviting members of the community to work there, to visit there, Drexel students to come, Drexel staff, that kind of a thing. So social entrepreneurs need to dream a little. Some of the best ideas that actually get realized start out as a dream. So think about that. Check it from above and see what you think. If there might be a good opportunity there for us to do something. So now my eyes are your eyes. I got my trusty GoPro on my head, and let's go take this walk that I was talking about. Again, thinking about, look at that, you just see, getting your favorite beverage, good snack, view of trains going to New York City, Washington, D.C. Think of all the big deals that salespeople could close there. Think of all the big business that Drexel could do once Drexel's back in session. I sure wish parking was like this normally. Is this freaky or what? This is not the weekend. This is not a holiday. It's your basic springtime Tuesday afternoon on our campus. Second week of spring semester. And where is everyone? Oh. So as we're walking down 32nd Street, do you think this is a beautiful campus? Did you know several years ago, some magazine or someone did a survey of the aesthetics of urban campuses in the country, and Drexel reportedly was voted the ugliest urban campus. Again, that was a bunch of years ago, but I'm not sure that it's changed that much in its look. What do you think about that? What do you do about that? You know, you guys are the clients here. We have a big department in the Westfall School that does both architecture and then interior design. I'm always wondering, like, why don't we get together with more of those departments, and you know, why don't we come up with a plan that might be a little bit more aesthetically exciting than what we have here? Let alone, how do we make it so that it's more ecologically healthy as well, you know? So as we pass the armory, which is in the process of being reworked, it's also the place where I saw Nirvana in concert, not to date myself much. We're coming to you know, one of the areas that might be considered, you know, around the center of campus. I'm looking at the brick building, the Pearlstein building. I can literally see my office. Technically, I'm not even supposed to be able to be up in my office. Again, you know, that sci-fi feeling of what's going on here. So this is what I wanted to get us started on. You know, looking up Lancaster Walk, you see a lot of grass. You know, think about, does all that grass get used by the students or others? What purpose does that grass serve? And we're going to talk in this walk a little bit, and certainly in class, about the overall ecological state of our planet. And grass is not the most ecologically rich area for plants and wildlife to do their thing. So, like, think about that. Do we have too much or too little grassy spots on campus like this here? And now I'm at the old Firestone building, the place where you see the neon signs that are housing the Neon Museum, the collection of historic neon signs that some person whose name I can't remember saved in its very cool collection. But we can't get in here. What's with that? I'm at the heart of campus. Now, would a social entrepreneur think that that's good social practice to have something this vast right in the heart of the campus, and it's locked? You can see the flashing lights, but that's about it. So what would you do with this site? Now, I'm sure this site is destined to be part of the Schuylkill Yards at some point.
Its air rights are too valuable to have a couple-story building here. But in the meantime, look at that, garages. Can you imagine like an open air cafe in here? Why aren't we having more of that here? So, you know, is this landscape with plants? Does it get you going? Is it something that you find exciting? So these are the things that that we can think about a little bit while we're on our campus. And you know, what different stuff could we do to maybe like invite us to be more inspired, or to invite nature maybe to visit us? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to have lunch here and be joined by birds and butterflies and things? So that's stuff to think about. I want to shoot us across the street spontaneously. I wasn't planning to do this, but I want to show you a spot that if it weren't for students that I had last semester telling me about this and doing a little report on this, I didn't even know this existed. So we go to school on an urban campus. So it's not sprawling with acreage, right? It's tight because real estate's at a premium here. So the way you plan space is pretty important because we don't have an abundance of it. So how many of you have been up these steps? Let's go run up, you know, so that we don't take too much time and I can talk and run at the same time. I never went up these steps until my students in social entrepreneurship last term said, we want to create something more exciting than this up here. And I was like, oh my God, maybe you guys are saying the same thing. I didn't even know this was here. And the students that did their report on it, they basically said, nobody goes here. It's generally always empty. So they had a cool idea just to do some, you know, social restaurant kind of a thing. But, and what do you know? Another patch of grass. We're gonna talk about grass a little bit later on this tour. But is that what you wanna see on this campus? A lot of gray and of the asphalt and the pavement and the brick, and then turf grass. So now that I got your blood flowing, let's, you know, hustle down these steps a little bit and get back to our tour. I just got this entrepreneurial brainstorm as I jaywalk. Wow, jaywalking isn't even a challenge during a pandemic, let me tell you. I could probably run a little bit in places where there's not a lot to cover, and it might be a cool impact for you guys on the GoPro. But I am going to want to talk about the Drexel University bridge up ahead here. Did you ever see this parking lot so empty? Yeah, neither did I. So we're on one of the main thoroughfares of Philadelphia, Market Street. Back when William Penn got Philadelphia going, this was first called High Street. Slightly higher, I believe, than the other streets nearby. So let's talk about the Drexel Bridge here for a second. You can see the our proud dragon logo on it, but let's take a peek over here. This is a good view. So this is a freight line that on the busiest of days, because my office overlooks this, I don't think it carries a train more than once or twice a day. Maybe it does 3 times or something. This goes right through Penn's campus, right past Franklin Field, and we're gonna see another end of it later on in our walk. But here's some space. What might you do underneath the bridge here rather than have just kind of concrete that's falling apart? As an entrepreneur, I would think we could do some kind of cool pop-up space. This is such an old sign. See that? Conrail, Consolidated Rail Corporation. That thing's an antique. I think we could do something better here than just have this sit here. So I've had thoughts on this structure that it could be an amazing pedestrian high line for Philadelphia. It could take you from Penn's campus through Drexel's campus, practically all the way to the Philadelphia Zoo. And there's a lot of other lines around. You know, my question is, could you convert, you know, could the freight trains that ride this, could they still carry their commerce at a different train line that's nearby? So look at this, I could almost lie down in Market Street. All right, so those of you who know what a newspaper is, you know, that physical thing that they throw in your driveway if you're a dinosaur like me and you still get a physical newspaper. So actually they made some progress since the last time I was here. They kind of gave a facelift to the facade of what's the old Philadelphia Bulletin building, which was the other competitive newspaper to the Philadelphia Inquirer for Philadelphia. And now it is the house of Drexel Plaza. But about a year ago, they opened this park area here. It used to be a parking lot. Now, what do you think of the design here? So, when there's a pandemic, of course, you don't have people hanging out with each other. But let me tell you, if you came here this time last year, you might think there was a pandemic because you would never see people on this green grass. There were some makeshift chairs that were out in the plaza area here. Some people used them, but here we are across from a major train station, 30th Street Station. And you know, what's the point of this grass here? It's turf grass. And if you wanna, what's the point of the crisscross little mini paths here? Is that for walking? Is it for fancy? Is this a place for people to like hang out? But what do you think of the design of this? This was expensive. This is a developer hiring a high-level landscape architect saying, give us a really memorable design for a new space, which is our initial building from the Schuylkill Yards project across from old historic 30th Street Station. So, and was this potentially an opportunity to do anything positive for wildlife? And speaking of wildlife, one of the more eclectic looking buildings is Cirrus Center, which is what I'm looking at right now. And when that was built with its blue glass, it was kind of a pioneer building in University City, let alone it was different shaped from most typical skyscrapers. So it was viewed as a real positive addition to the landscape. One of the things that we have to think about as a product of our progress are some of the unintended impacts. So that building alone, now I don't know the exact numbers, but I could tell you that there's a guy who's employed whose job it is to go out most mornings and sweep up dead birds. Because as great as eyesight as birds have, they still can't navigate blue plate glass windows like so many of our skyscrapers. They don't see that as you and I see that. they just, that's not, they did not evolve with their vision able to make that out as an obstruction. Did you ever have a bird fly into your window and you're wondering, like, where did that thing come from? How did that happen? Well, skyscrapers kill millions of birds a year. I don't know that anybody has a true count on what that is, but, you know, why aren't we more quickly mandating, you know, there are people working on it, you know, window coverings that are made to be visible to birds. But that, you know, beautiful building, in the opinion of a lot of people, definitely a trendsetter in Philadelphia, bird killer. Some people are impatient even when there's nobody on the streets, let me tell you. So as our science fiction movie continues, all the fresh spring tulips and other flowers are out here, as you can see, on the porch at 30th Street Station. Unfortunately, no food trucks here on this nice Tuesday in April. So do you like this design? I can smell the flowers. I think it smells pretty good. Is this a place you like to hang out? So in social entrepreneurship, we will be talking about issues of poverty. Right now, the homeless population in Philadelphia is really, you know, is really being challenged. You know, there's people that are concerned if they gather too closely at a shelter facility, will the virus get transmitted? We're all impacted by this pandemic, but some of us clearly are impacted worse than others. It's also a time to kind of consider, you know, as we look at like these unfortunate people, you know, what as not so great as things might be for us, if our health is intact, then you know, things could be a lot worse. So let's stop here for a sec. See this majestic eagle? Looks to me like it's probably made out of limestone. Maybe it's marble. Either way, it's calcium carbonate, because marble is just a metamorphic form of limestone. But let's, across the way here, you see 30th Street Station, okay? So 30th Street Station was built and owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Pennsylvania Railroad, in its day, might have been the largest, most successful company in the entire world. If not, it was certainly like in the top 5 or 10, you know, of like large behemoth kind of companies that that did really well over a really long period of time. So the Pennsylvania Railroad got national, it got huge, and it built mammoth train stations like this, certainly up and down the East Coast. So this is also called Penn or Pennsylvania Station because it was a Pennsylvania Railroad station. Now you might have heard or been to Penn Station or been to Penn Station in New York City. Now, if you go to New York City and you arrive in Penn Station, what do you see? Well, you don't really see anything because you arrive underground, and at the site of Penn Station, you have Madison Square Garden. So this is worth considering and thinking back to the history of train stations and architectural preservation. So in the 1960s, when railroads started to really go downhill, a railroad is actually a real estate developer. So if you think about it, what does a railroad need a lot of in order to transport people around? Well, it needs real estate. So railroads, and as well as utilities, they're like the largest holders of real estate around. And so the Pennsylvania Railroad realized that the air rights on which their Penn station sat had some real value. So the idea was, hey, let's put our rail station underground, and let's do a deal so that the Knicks and the Rangers can play in a state-of-the-art new facility. So in the early 60s, a decision was made to knock down Penn Station. Now, if you want to see something beautiful, Google images of old Penn Station, New York City, and you'll see something that was modeled on Roman baths. It had open skylights, it had loads of ironwork, it had majestic art. And basically, as the first wrecking ball hit, you all of a sudden had people regretting and crying out like, what did we just do? We just took one of the most beautiful buildings in the entire world, and we gave the okay to demolish it. And so that, while that was a really, really sad chapter, after that time, there became a much more defined movement for preserving the old architecture that we find valuable. So that's a good outcome that maybe, arose from a really sad situation. Doesn't mean that architecture gets preserved all the time. It certainly does not, but it happens a lot more, and a lot of people look back to that as like a real pivotal time. So back to this eagle guy. This eagle, he or she's not from Philadelphia. Nope. That's one of the things that remains from the old Penn Station in New York. So basically, they knocked the building down, and some of the artwork got scattered in other Pennsylvania Railroad holdings. And so here we are on the Market Street Bridge, and we have 4 eagles, at each, two at each end of the river. That's basically that over here, and then in some other places. That's what remains of beautiful Penn Station in New York City. So let's check out our first glimpse of something that's going to define a lot of the rest of our walk. There's the Schuylkill River, resembling more the cup of coffee you had this morning, probably, than a clean or healthy looking river. Why is that? So I'm walking a day after it rained a lot. So when it rains in these areas, what happens is, because of the state of our neighborhoods, suburbs and towns and cities, rainwater washes down, doesn't have a lot of places to go, and it rips out the topsoil. And where does that topsoil go? Well, it usually just follows the water. A lot of times it enters a storm sewer, which might be directly connected to the river, or it enters a creek, which then empties into the river. But basically, you're in effect seeing a form of pollution. You're seeing suspended sediments, and that's what's giving the river this brown color. In a day or two, it'll be back to its murky green, which it has as its normal color. A lot of that is colored by the algae that also is in the river. So in addition to into mud, we're seeing, as we look at, don't worry, I won't jump, you're seeing also some signs of pollution. Fresh after rain, like I can see a plastic bottle going down right now, but sometimes you can see tons and tons of bottles just washing down. Where's it all going? What's your guess? I'll tell you in a second when we get closer to the river level. So let's just get another glimpse of another eagle here, just to put that in your mind. Look back over and say goodbye to West Philly for the moment, because we are now in Center City. So let's head down this ramp. By the way, a little advertisement for my Social Entrepreneur's Introduction to Land class. Assuming I'm able to teach that again next year, which I assume I'll be able, but doubly assuming that I'll be able to teach it in a in-person format, one of the things that we do as part of that class is we actually hop in kayaks a little lower down on the Schuylkill, and we get a glimpse of the city from the viewpoint of the river itself. Very cool field trip to take. So think about that for the future. So let's check out where we are a little bit. So look where we are. We're at the river, below Market Street. Back to that question, where's this river flowing? Where's the plastic bottles that pass us by? Where are they going? So this is the lower Schuylkill River. Schuylkill's about 130 miles long. Right now it's in its home stretch. Its last several miles. So the Schuylkill flows and then it meets up with the Delaware River. Delaware River flows and it turns into the Delaware Bay. Delaware Bay joins the Atlantic Ocean. So Philadelphia, in a lot of ways, is an ocean city. And what that also means is, at a place like I'm standing right now, is this river goes up and down 6 or 7 feet 2 times every single day. So this is a tidal river. Question, what's happening to sea level these days? Right, I bet you all said it. It's rising, and it's rising measurably. So we're standing in a spot that floods frequently already. Some days you'll come down here, it might not have even been a big storm, and there might have been a full moon, which helps the tide get even higher, and there might have been some other conditions, and then this thing overtops its banks. All the sediment that you're seeing, some of it washes out. I think we just saw a fish jump over there. See that that whirlpool-y looking thing? Yeah, big catfish that live in here. So anyway, so even as we speak, this river overflows its banks a decent amount. So what's going to happen as sea level keeps rising? So I'm looking across the way. That's I-76, the Schuylkill Expressway, making its way below the area, just below 30th Street Station. So it's almost a certainty that in all of your lifetimes, there's going to be flooding that makes it impractical to keep an interstate highway where it is right now. And now where's the planning going on for that? You know, I was on this really cool bike tour that was led by a project manager at the Philadelphia Airport. The Philadelphia Airport sits at sea level, okay? Basically at sea level. It sits on the Delaware River, and the Delaware River is essentially at sea level. And they're in the middle of like a 40-year expansion plan where they're building yet another runway, basically along the Delaware River. So they're building in a place that's right next to a chief ocean connection, and they're doing so at a time when they know sea level is rising. And I remember when this project manager was telling what he does, I said, well, what's the contingency plan? Or what do you guys, what's your plan all about for when sea level rises and you guys are gonna have, like, you know, planes landing? And his answer, without any kind of smirk, was, well, that's not my problem. I'll be retired by then. So when you look at the environment around you, like right now, this is a really interesting time. Everybody is in an uproar, and understandably so, because all of our health is impacted right now. And if it's not being impacted, there's the threat that it's going to be impacted. So that's why you're seeing very few people out here. It's why you're seeing a lot of them with masks on when they walk or run. So you have that going on. But what's going to happen when the pandemic kind of eases? What are people going to be thinking about climate issues? Climate's still going to be changing and heating up at the incredible rate that it's doing so right now. Sea level is going to keep rising as it's been doing. But those impacts, they're not going to keep us in our houses tomorrow or next year. But some generation's going to be nailed. Do you know that in the hurricane, I think of 2012, New York City got inundated, the lower Manhattan part, so that water actually entered the subway system. So right now they're spending billions of dollars to kind of equip themselves, because if you look at where Manhattan is located, it's not like 30 or so miles, maybe 50 miles that Philadelphia is from the ocean. It's around the corner from the ocean. So it's like, what's Wall Street gonna do, you know, when the tides go up permanently? So it's like, we know this stuff, but what are we doing about it? And what does it take for us to do something about it? Do we care that other generations, that maybe they're going to be born after we're long gone, but some generation is going to have to deal with the mess as we keep building cities along rivers that are tidal, and let alone as we keep doing things that aren't even leveling out what's going on with global warming? So think about that from a social entrepreneurial standpoint. So here we are heading under the Market Street Bridge. The subway actually goes underneath where we are right now. You're also seeing, if you look up, wow, there's a long one. I don't know how well it shows, but we have stalactites to look at. So if you've ever been in a cave and seen the long, thin things hanging down, what that is limestone or calcium carbonate that emanates through the rock, and then when water goes down, it actually builds those cool little icicle looking things. And every time a water droplet comes, it leaves a little bit of limestone residue, and that stalactite gets a little bit longer. I'm looking down at the ground here where it's wet. If people didn't walk here, you'd have stalagmites, which are the opposite, growing from the ground. But why is that happening? It's because this bridge is largely made out of concrete that we're walking under. And concrete, the main constituents of concrete are limestone. And so the acid rain is making its way through the limestone. Let alone bridges are designed to drain. And here we have like a natural happening on an unnatural structure. So check out across the freight train tracks over here where you see that graffiti. Just note that wall for a second. We're going to come to another section of it, but see that area of stone. Just put that in your mind. We're gonna come and we're gonna see another end of it in a second, and we'll talk about that. So here's another piece of that wall structure that I asked you to look at. By the way, I told you at the beginning of this, always be thinking like, you know, why are things as they are? And if they're not so good, what could be done about that? You can see a tent over there. Somebody's living basically under this bridge next to a freight train track. What do we do about things like that? So here you have the other end of a remnant structure. So this area over here has a nickname that's called the Chinese Wall. So for years and years, trains came from across the way in West Philly, and then they made their way over above where I'm standing right now, and they connected over to where you see this remnant structure, and in an elevated format, which extremely wide. So picture that, like the width of Market Street, at least that wide. It was a place for the trains to come in to the exact center of the city, basically to where Broad and Market meet. So when the 1950s rolled around, the idea came, hey, why don't we get rid of that Chinese Wall? Do we really need it? And what could we do in its place? So for another topic at another time, for all the details of what happened, the Chinese Wall was knocked down, and in its place, we'll get a glimpse of it in a second, a new street was created, and that street is called JFK Boulevard. So JFK Boulevard is one of the newest streets in Philadelphia, and basically it reclaimed the real estate that was held by the train tracks. Now, if any of you have been to New York City's Park Avenue, you'll find that Park Avenue used to be a similar situation. Park Avenue is basically dead ends at Grand Central Station, a beautiful train station that that luckily has not been knocked down. You can still go enjoy it anytime. And there, the New York Central Railroad that owned those tracks decided that they could become real estate developers, and they took their trains that made their way to Grand Central Station, put them underground, and they built Park Avenue. Park Avenue is a beautiful boulevard. It's one of the most successful areas in all of New York City to this day. It's a ritzy place to live or work, and it really works. It's lively. So let's go take another little run and just see the early part of what JFK Boulevard looks like. You know, how did Philadelphia do when it tried to follow suit of what New York did? So, hope you're not too winded. So this is our view of JFK Boulevard. Again, even when there's not a pandemic, the only difference you'll find here is this is a raceway of cars. It's a good place to do some drag racing. Not that I recommend it, but this area is disconnected from the rest of the city until you get down about 8 blocks or so from here. You can't even connect with other surface streets because we're slightly higher up. So this is kind of a dead zone. So it's a place to think about what could have been done. It's a harder question to say, what could you do now? Because when somebody builds or switches up infrastructure, you're talking billions of dollars to make changes in it. You don't just like all of a sudden you know, make street connections when no connections exist. So this is what JFK Boulevard looks like. And if we cross over, you get this cool little peek again of what's left of the Chinese wall. So what did get created was something that's called Penn Center. If you're interested in it, look it up. Look up a planner named Edmund Bacon, Kevin Bacon's dad. He was a planner in Philadelphia for a good 20 years, from 1950 to 1970. And he was one of the main people that helped Philadelphia turn this newly claimed area and put it in more of the financial district of Philly. And so if we took a walk a mile or so down towards City Hall, you'd find buildings such as 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to, like, I don't know, 12 or 13 Penn Center. And that's what's replaced the old Chinese wall. So that diversion being over, let's go back down and see what happens along the river. Start asking those questions. Is this a good example of thinking about the well-being of the planet in a city environment? Are we doing the best we can to not just get humans by the river, but to think about the plants and animals that also might want to be next to the river? So here's the train bridge that the commuter trains ride over. Check out some of these stalactites. There's some beauties up there. Mind you, this is a Tuesday afternoon. That whole thing with social distancing, it's a challenge on a narrow pathway here. This pathway was not designed to accommodate humans during a pandemic, but it's hard to blame people for the urge to get out and be outdoors, especially given all the great connections between being outside, being in nature, and health and well-being, both physical and mental. So I'm in another one of those areas of turf, and before I stop the tape and do a little demonstration here on the turf, I want to just, again have you ask you guys, is everybody being served by what's going on by the river here? You got a freight train, you got buildings close by, you got pathways for people to run and bike, walk. But what about nature? I already told you this river connects to the ocean. That means that fish that swim in the ocean swim in this river. That means that birds that fly up along the Atlantic coast come up this river. They all want to eat, they all want to feel good, they all want it to be healthy here too. So is this the best environment for them? So let me show you something for a second to sort of make a point.
So back to that grass thing I was talking about. Here we are, river's over here. Told you it floods all the time. Do you think it's better to have plants that have deep roots or shallow roots that's close to the river? And why might that be? So what do you think about that? So if you guess that deep roots are better, you're right. The deeper the roots are of a plant, those roots go down, depending on the plant, they can go down as many as 3, 5, 10 feet, and they create these little micro tunnels. So that when it rains, or if the river would flood itself, they basically provide places for water to go. So the more that water infiltrates or makes its way back into the soil, the healthier an ecosystem. So what does turf grass do? And where's turf grass from? So let me show you. So this is typical turf grass. The same stuff that's all throughout Drexel's campus. The same stuff that was on that brand new plaza in front of Drexel Plaza. This is the root zone. You're seeing it. Under here, you have nothing but just dirt, okay? So turf grass hardly sucks up water much more than asphalt, believe it or not. When it rains here hard, water hits the pathway, it might even hit the train tracks, and it just basically sheet flows over this grass directly into the river. So this will do almost nothing to capture sediments and pollutants and stuff. But if you had plants that were this tall or that tall, that had roots that went all the way down, different story. So the more you see turf grass, the more you see something that's not a sustainable way to really do anything about what's called natural stormwater management. So think about that the next time, like, somebody makes a big deal out of their lawn. Americans love their lawns, but they might look pretty, when they're fertilized and nice and emerald green, but they do not do much of anything for the state of nature, let alone the state of just like better water management. So speaking of plants that are called native plants, let's talk about this. You know where this turf grass is probably from? Europe. Did you ever hear of Kentucky bluegrass? It's not from Kentucky, it's European. So originally there were plants that were called native plants, and that's what grew up around the river. Like in this area, you'd have like big cattails and big things called bulrushes and all kinds of like cool flowering plants, like hibiscus, and that's what you would see in a natural river environment. Unfortunately, we've gotten rid of almost all of that, and we've made everything landscaped nicely like this, and I say nicely in quotes. So hold the discussion about plants for a second, and let's think about something that I'm sure you've all seen, and you probably all know what it is. So this guy over here is the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly is something we might all take for granted, seeing in the middle of the summer. It's native to 48 of our states. Everything but Alaska and Hawaii, I believe, has monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies are amazing entrepreneurial little buggies. The monarch butterfly can make its way down from Philadelphia 3,000 or so miles all the way to forests in Mexico. It might overwinter in Mexico, make a new generation of caterpillars that later on turn into butterflies. They make their way up to Philadelphia, to Chicago, as far as deep into Canada. So what other creature that weighs so little, maybe like, no more than a gram or so, can do such an amazing feat as migrating 3,000 miles like that? So guess what's happening to this common insect that we might all take for granted? It's in danger of going extinct. And the quick reason for why that is if you took a flyover the United States, or you did it, you went to an aerial application and you looked at it from that standpoint. What's the United States made out of right these days? Cities don't take up a lot of space. Okay, they're actually pretty efficient in how they're designed. What takes up a really lot of space is agriculture, commercial agriculture. So corn and soybean, crops like that, where you have literally what's called a monoculture of a species growing for food or for something like cotton, and nothing else. So what do professional farmers do to maximize their corn yield? Well, they get something that's called a broadleaf herbicide, right? And they spray and spray and spray. So it magically gets rid of all the weeds, the unwanted plants, but it doesn't kill the corn crop. So guess what? This monarch has evolved with a plant that you see in this picture called the milkweed. And that's what these pink flowers are. And so the monarch butterfly sees a milkweed plant, lays its eggs on the milkweed plant, lots of eggs, which later on turn into little mini caterpillars. The caterpillars get really big by eating the milkweed plant. So now get this, the milkweed plant is poisonous to practically every animal out there. The entrepreneurial monarch realized, hey, if we can evolve and adapt to be able to eat milkweed leaves, then we'll have a monopoly on the milkweed and we won't have any competition. Not only that, when the other birds that want to eat us realize that, see this black and yellow thing called a caterpillar? Stay away from that one, because when you eat it, you get sick, because the poison in the milkweed plant gets digested by the caterpillar, which isn't impacted by it, but other things that eat it usually are. So this amazing coevolution took place where you have adult monarch butterflies laying eggs only on a milkweed plant. The caterpillars emerging, getting fat and happy on the milkweed leaves, and then they go through a metamorphosis, which is pretty cool, by the way, called a chrysalis. They turn into this beautiful sculptural image right here. After a week or two, it gets dark and you can start to see the wings of the new butterfly. The next thing you know, you get butterflies eating their way out of their chrysalis looking like that. And so the cycle goes on and on. Except now, when butterflies are flying throughout the 48 connected United States and they're looking for places to lay their eggs, where do they lay them? So the milkweed, that's a pretty broad leaf, right? That's not a grass. Corn is a grass. So when the farmers are out mass spraying their crops, killing all the weeds, what gets killed along with all the weeds? All the milkweed does. And so to this day, we have this major problem where these insects that were so common, meaning billions and billions of them exist, they're in danger of going extinct. So there's actually a plant that's called swamp milkweed, which could take wet conditions. How cool would that be if you had that over here? Center City, Philadelphia hardly has any milkweeds left. Most of them have been sprayed or cut down by people doing landscaping. So wouldn't you know that I happen to have in my pocket here, if I could get it out, it's not behaving with me right now, I have the pods of last year's milkweed. So check this out. How cool is this, that you have this plant that makes these pods with real fluffy, feather-like things, and then the seeds are connected, and that's how milkweed travels. So let's be a little devious here. Unfortunately, they're going to mow here, but if they didn't mow, we could get milkweed growing by the river here. This is just common milkweed that we're doing. Look at this. And if you look down there, it's just flying all over the place. How cool is that? not only that, this stuff is really fluffy. It's fluffy on your skin. There's something called biomimicry. Look, it just got in my mouth, but it's okay. Could you take the, after the seeds go, what could we do with that fluffy stuff instead of like cotton or something? Could this be a sustainable material that we could like make down jackets out of, but we don't have to kill the geese to make those jackets? There's an idea for you. Let's see who gets it first. But anyway, so we're deviously planting milkweed in a place that really ought to have more milkweed and native plants in it. So think about that this summer when you see the beautiful monarch butterfly passing you by. Think about how you might be able to make a difference in trying to reverse the extinction trend that right now is going on. So we're a little bit further up the river, and there's this handy signage over here that's worth checking out. So riverfront access, now all the people that are running and walking around here might be taking it for granted, but this stretch of trail that we're on was conceived of, believe it or not, in the 1960s by a landscape architect named John Collins, and it wasn't built until after the year 2000. So it took about 40 years before there was the idea that it would be really good for Philadelphians to have access along the river, and until it actually started to be given below the art museum where we are right now. So this is showing you that there's a plan underway to continue to provide riverfront access all the way down, at least to Bartram's Garden, which is all the way down here, and then and ideally further down the Schuylkill. There's still a long way to go on that, and most of the riverfront in Philadelphia, both on the Schuylkill and the Delaware, to this day, it's private property. You can't get there. So health issues aside of having native vegetation and wildlife close to the river, humans can't even get close to the river and throughout most of the city. So this is actually progress in Philadelphia, given that you have all of this either having recently been built or currently in progress. All right, so here's a good little spot that'll show you what I was talking about earlier about the value of native plants. So all around me, you actually have native plants and a whole drainage setup that was put in place by the Philadelphia Water Department. And so this thing is called a rain garden. You can check the sign out in a second. But the thing I really want you to take note of on the sign is that this is the value of native plants. On this sign, this is last year's switchgrass or Panicum virgatum, it looks like. See these pretty flowers? Check the roots out. Think back to the turf grass I showed you about and how deep those roots are. So that's the point that I was trying to make. Oh, and look what they did. There's a little tiny monarch, it looks like, up here. So this is what you want to see in your plants by the river, let alone your plants just about anywhere. So that critters like this, either a painted turtle or a red-bellied turtle, I assume, if not the red-eared slider, which it kind of looks like, but he's not a good turtle to have in our local environment. But anyway, check this out. The more you see of this, the better. All right, so we're again further up the Schuylkill River, and we're going to take a little walk and check this skate park out called Payne Park. And as you take a look at this skateboard park that you might think is a really good design if you're a skateboarder, check out on your own Love Park, Stevie Williams, DGK, things like that. So if you looked up skateboarding images of Love Park, that'll kind of set the stage for the social story that's a really sad one. So in the 1990s, Love Park, which is a park that was designed in the 60s right near City Hall, was basically a park that was not used by people other than homeless individuals. Really was not a successfully used park until skateboarders saw
that it had things like granite that we're looking at now, and a lot of like plains, meaning like, you know, flat areas and levels. And basically citizen skateboarders redesigned Love Park and they made it into a skateboard park. And so and amazing stories happen. So one of which is there was a guy named Stevie Williams who was about 15 years old, poor kid from Philadelphia, North Philly. Mom was a drunk. I don't even think he had a father that he knew of. And he basically found himself on a skateboard in Love Park. And what he proceeded to do was he developed his art form on the skateboard. He got exceptionally good at it. And he, you know, from Philadelphia, he made his way to Los Angeles, and he basically became a famous skateboarder. And not only that, he started a company. He was a total entrepreneur, and basically a branding company with clothing and skateboards and things like that for, you know, for the skateboarding world. And he called his company DGK, which stood for Dirty Ghetto Kids, which was a nickname that he unfortunately had to deal with when he was skateboarding around in Philadelphia. So he basically gave the big finger to the rest of the world with the name of his company and became a millionaire. So guess what happened not too long after Stevie Williams and other people who found themselves on skateboards and became pretty successful entrepreneurs? The mayor at the time thought it was uncouth for Philadelphia to have skateboarders skating around a public park so close to City Hall. And the long story cut down short is that the mayor said it was bad and said, we got to stop this. Along came some company that offered the city $1 million. There was something called the X Games on ESPN, Extreme Games. And this company realized the value of skateboarding in Philadelphia and offered the city $1 million to put towards developing that as a more permanent place for skateboarding to take place. And guess what our entrepreneurial city did? They turned it down. Now you could Google all of this, and you can find like Channel 6 news from, you know, a couple decades or a few decades ago, where this company did one of those ceremonial, really large checks of $1 million, and you know the mayor decided no. So the consolation prize for skateboarders was Payne Park. That guy I told you about, who was a city planner for a bunch of years, Ed Bacon, he was in his 90s when this happened. He thought that was the dumbest move ever. He got a couple guys who were a lot younger, and he practiced civil disobedience. He went out to Love Park on a skateboard and broke the law while these guys helped him roll around a little bit on his board, just to kind of make his statement. But in an area across the street, basically from Penn Center, to which to this day is pretty abandoned. The city had hoped that it would be like a big area for people to do outdoor cafes and stuff. Think about it. 20, 30 years ago, Philadelphia could have been the center for skateboarding, which could be like a 24/7 kind of activity, an excuse for restaurants and bars to spring up all over and bring a lot of people to watch this artistic form of athleticism. And instead, the city said the skateboarders can have a park, but we're gonna tuck them out of the way, you know, near the river, behind the Ben Franklin Parkway. And so that was an opportunity missed big time. But just for your own fun, Google again Stevie Williams skateboarding Love Park, and you'll get some of the coolest old images ever. So how's our river doing? What's that white stuff floating down? Can that be good? Can't tell you exactly what it is, but chances are it's not anything that's really good. So is this river water clean? Is it dirty? Whichever choice you answered, you're right. It's clean and it's dirty. There's a book called The Reclamation of the Lower Schuylkill River, written in the 1920s, and it documents how incredibly polluted and dead the river was at that time. The Industrial Revolution had been going on for 60 years or so, and basically Philly's river was dead to life. There were places that could catch fire. There were so much chemicals floating on top. There was something called an abattoir, which is a slaughterhouse, which would slaughter its animals, and the blood and guts would go directly into the river. Municipal solid waste would get dumped right into the river. Textiles were always big in Philadelphia. When they dyed seat covers red, that's what color the river flowed. If they were dyeing blue that day, the river would have blue in it. So the river was really, really dirty. So what happened over time, as we get back on our path, is that the pollution continued all the way up until the 1970s. And in 1972, under the President Richard Nixon, the Clean Water Act was passed. And so the early 70s were a big time for the environment, in that not only was the Clean Water Act passed, but an act that created the Endangered Species Act. That was another thing that was enacted, and the EPA came into being, the Environmental Protection Agency. So you started finally in the 70s having an awareness of the impacts humans can have on the environment. So with the Clean Water Act, all of a sudden, the simple act of dumping your garbage into the river, it was outlawed. Penalties were attached to it, big ones. And so seemingly almost overnight, rivers across the country miraculously cleaned up. And the miracle was simply that people stopped dumping in them. So while in the 1920s, you might have had a few hardy species of catfish and not much more, able to somehow, find enough dissolved oxygen to keep themselves alive in these crazily polluted rivers. After 1970, you had more and more native species coming back. So the fish population in this river, foam floating over it, plastic bottles and all, is higher than it's ever been in the last 100 or more years. So again, is the river clean or is it dirty? And again, the answer is both. It's way cleaner than 1920s. It's way cleaner than the 1950s. But a lot of the stuff that got put into the river, that was able to basically flush out, find its way into the ocean and kind of like dissipate, although it never fully, becomes benign. But what you have at the bottom of a lot of rivers is something that's going to be an issue for many, many, many years, because when you have industry, you also have the dumping of heavy metals. And so things like lead and arsenic and mercury, they tend to cluster and get caught in all the muck at the bottom of the river. So if that muck stays together, it stays relatively harmless. But if that muck gets dredged up, then you have heavy metals floating in your river. So we have a long way to go to make our rivers fully clean. But at present, our river is doing a lot better than it's done in years and years. Did you know that Philadelphia probably has the largest collection of public art in the entire country? Somebody took the fishing rod out of this fishing sculpture's hand, but he sits here nevertheless. So check this out. Let's look down for a bit. See these guys? So these are some of the fish that now swim in the Schuylkill. A lot of these, like that American shad that you see, spend a lot of their time in the ocean, and then when they get big and older and mature, they swim up places like the Schuylkill River, and they look for freshwater creeks, and that's where they spawn. Here's some other fish. Other fish, like that American eel, they do what the shad and also like the salmon and the sturgeon do in reverse. The American eel lives in creeks most of its life, and then it gets older and it swims downstream into the deep into the Atlantic Ocean to a place called the Sargasso Sea, and that's where it spawns, and then the young ones come upstream, and then they return to the creeks. So you have all that kind of activity coming back to the river once you clean it up. And here's like a little ode to the past. You know, why did the river get so dirty? Well, look at this. You had Liberty Bell toilet, pure manila toilet paper or tissue like you see there. And you have a yarn company. And you have an anthracite is coal. Reading is on the Schuylkill River. So these are the different companies that literally polluted the river. They were all there in the Industrial Revolution. I mean, look at this. Phoenix Ironworks. Phoenixville is a city that's come back quite nicely. The Phoenix Ironworks, I'm sure, contributed a lot of pollution. How many chemicals get tossed into the river when you make locomotives? The first paper maker, Rittenhouse, there's a place called Rittenhouse Town on the, like right above the Wissahickon Creek on the Montashonee Creek, and it's the first paper factory in all of Philadelphia. So industry got started way early in the as early as the late 1600s, and continued way through the Industrial Revolution. So given everything, you know, the rivers in a lot of ways are quite resilient. Right now it's basically high tide. If we came back here in a few hours, this place would look totally different. You'd see exposed rocks and things like that, because that's the difference in tide. But where you see that waterfall slash dam up ahead, that's where the tidal properties of the Schuylkill end. So what do the fish do? So we'll talk about, you know, why that dam is there. But in the meantime, if you look far across the river, you see a little structure that's it's a remnant from when there was a canal. The Schuylkill used to be a lot rockier above the falls than it is, because there wasn't a dam, so it had more rapids and things. So what they did was they constructed canals, and they would put a barge on the canal, they'd load coal on the barge, and they would use mules to pull the barges down the canals, and that's how they got the coal from the countryside or from the mountains into places like Philadelphia. So after the canals went away, replaced by the railroads, some of them were left. There's still some intact canals all throughout Pennsylvania, but across the way they were able to convert what was left into what's called a fish ladder. So it's not an ideal circumstance, but it's a lot better than no ladder at all. So those migratory fish that we were just talking about are permitted, if they can get over there. There's basically like a series of steps in the water that lets them get above above the falls over here. So were we able to have class in person, we would actually go into this place. You see the sign there, Fairmount Waterworks. These doors wouldn't ordinarily be locked. And we would go down and we would see the remnants of something that was one of the biggest entrepreneurial feats ever. Can't really see much, but there's an interpretive center down here. And below these Greek Revival structures, you have the Fairmount Waterworks, which was the site of Philadelphia's center of producing potable water for the entire city, which was a state-of-the-art feat. There was nothing else like it in the entire world when this was done. And so what you had happen was the city continued to grow, and they needed a way to get drinking water safely to all the constituents in Philadelphia. So at first, they pumped water out of the Schuylkill, right around here, and this is where they took it through steam engines. They pumped the water up this hill, and this hill is called, or where you can see cliffs, is called Fairmount. So they pumped the water up to reservoirs that to this day still exist, except now they're the basement of the Philadelphia Art Museum. And then from there, they were able to gravity feed the water down to the rest of the city, and it was a feat unto itself. But steam engines had a lot of issues, and they ended up having a few major explosions that killed people. And so they needed another entrepreneurial solution, and that's where the dam came into play. So they decided, rather than using steam power to get the water, they would just literally use the power of the water itself. And that's what the dam was built for. So we can get a sense of how that worked as we pass these other historic looking structures here. So if you look over here, I'm looking at a bridge, even though it doesn't look like it. Right now you see the grass come right up to it. But over where this City of Philadelphia Water Department car is, and this parking lot is, that used to be called the Forebay. And so this area would have been filled with deep, deep water that made its way directly into the waterworks, where it then would get pumped up to the top of the top of Fairmount. And if we check out over here, we can see the pathway that water took. So let's first get a sense of the dam, especially a day after a lot of rain. We get to see it all foamy and frothy and stuff, so it's a good time to check it out and listen to it as well. Anyone need a basketball or a kickball? So what happened was they built this dam, and instead of it just going directly over like it's doing right now, the water would be diverted right over here to where you see this swale. So basically, this is kind of a slightly historic site. This low point was the pathway for the water to make its way in front of us over to that forebay that we talked about, then go underneath the waterworks buildings, where it then would be pumped up to where you see the art museum today. So when you study the environment, you need to think of it all in terms of ecosystems. In ecology, which is the study of ecosystems, nothing is isolated. If you do something, something else happens, okay? If I spray the milkweed in Omaha, I'm gonna get rid of milkweed. It's gonna have an impact on the caterpillars, and it's gonna have an impact on the monarch butterflies themselves, okay? So that's an ecosystem impact. So what happens when you take a river that was flowing with rapids? It had a place called East Falls, which was named after the waterfalls that flowed as part of the river system in that area. And then you put a dam on that river. Well, basically you create a 4-mile or 5-mile lake like you're seeing here. So when you create a lake, you create an opportunity for crew races. If there was no dam on the Schuylkill, Drexel's crew team could not be practicing its great feats on the Schuylkill River. So that lake-like impact, not natural, served to make Philadelphia one of the rowing capitals of our country. So what is this over here? Question. Is this island of trees natural or not natural? You're right. If you said it's natural, you're right. There's a lot of native trees here. I see silver maples growing. That's a great tree to have next to the river. They do all kinds of beneficial things. They're called riparian forest trees. You want to see lots of silver maples and cottonwoods and things like that next to the river. Did you say it's unnatural? Guess what? You're right. This little place right now that's more flooded than it normally is, it's called Silt Island or Mud Island. This wasn't here before they built the dam. But when you build a dam, it slows things down up above it. And so all the sediment and stuff, like all the brown stuff that you saw floating in the Schuylkill today, that backs up behind the dam. So look what happened. An island sort of basically formed because of the technological advance that made for Philadelphia to become the most sophisticated water system in the entire world. And then you had like this little island pop up. So that's what I mean. You're right if you said it's natural, because this is a natural environment that's come up here. You're right if you said it's unnatural, because this did not look at all like it looks right now, back when back before 1820 or so, when they built the Fairmount Dam. So for our last stop, I want to take you up on the on top of Fairmount, talk a little bit more about water. and its relation to the well-being of the city, the parks of the city, and a lot of the planning that takes place to this very day. So I'm back where that swale joins up with the former site of the forebay. And here's another view of the former bridge that crossed the deep forebay of water that used to be here. So for our last stop, let's head up this outcrop called Fairmount. This was all blasted out to make this area appropriate for capturing the water and sending it up to the top of the high point. And Fairmount was the high point in the early Philadelphia, the original city as it was laid out by William Penn. This is a great little opportunity to see schist, S-C-H-I-S-T, exposed here. It's the bedrock of Philadelphia as we make our way up the hill. And you can see plants and soil coming back to life in here. But a cool place to study the basics of ecology, just in a short walk up a hill, where you can see the layers of the land, which is really what the living part of the land is all about. There's bedrock, there's soil, there's different layers of plants, and in a healthy ecosystem, they all interact in a beneficial manner. It smells really good here too. Spring's totally coming into life. So here we are at the end of our walk, but at the high point of our walk, literally the high point. There's our majestic campus that we just left a little while ago. And if you remember the Drexel Bridge that we talked about, that's that aqueduct looking structure that you see above the Schuylkill Expressway. Now again, like I said, how cool would that be if that were literally dedicated to pedestrians only? So you could ride your bike or take a walk along that thing. Now that would be humanistic planning, in my opinion. So here's the fate of the waterworks. Philadelphia grew and grew and grew. The water system worked just fine in the early going. But what happened around 1850, 1860, check your history books and you know that that's when we had the Industrial Revolution. And I said earlier that the Schuylkill River is about 130 miles long. So when they built the waterworks, they didn't think about the idea of chemical treatment of water. They didn't see a need to. You could basically drink the water out of the river. It was pretty clean. And so as industry expanded and dumping continued, the water got polluted. And by the late 1800s, it became very problematic that people were getting sick from drinking the water. And so by the time the early 1900s rolled around, it was pretty bad. So the city knew that things were getting nasty, and they basically did a panic kind of a move. In the 1860s, 1870s, the city thought, okay, what if we got rid of all the industry around on both sides of the river? Might that clean the river up? So they did a controversial thing, and they enacted a legal maneuver called eminent domain. And basically what the city did was they bought up all of the land on both sides of the Schuylkill River from where we're standing right now all the way to what was then the city limits of Philadelphia. So for about 4.5 miles up from here, the city made all the land public. They also did the same on both sides of the Wissahickon Creek, which by itself had over 50 mills on it, so it was a big pollutant source as well. And they bought up all the land on both sides of the Wissahickon Creek to the city line. Now think about this for a second. The Schuylkill River, it's 130 miles long, give or take. We passed a bunch of signs like Reading Anthracite and Phoenix Iron Works. Well, Reading didn't stop making coal or mining coal and putting waste stuff in the stream. Phoenix Iron Works didn't stop making steel. So what Philadelphia did, it basically did nothing to clean up the water. So not long after they made that maneuver, by I'm going to say 1920, they had to scrap the whole waterworks and go to a filtration system done by chemical means. And they do that through a different set of systems where you can find drinking water plants in at least 3 places in the city. Belmont, there's one on Henry Avenue in East Falls, and then there's one in shallow Northeast Philly, I believe. So then what was the city supposed to do? Well, they did a really good PR about face, and they said, hey, we got more parkland than anybody. And that's what you're looking at right here. You're looking at the start of original Fairmount Park. So Philadelphia to this day has over 10,000 acres of parkland in it. More than half of it is kind of in our view or right behind that, because it has both sides of the Schuylkill, as we're looking at, and both sides of the Wissahickon Creek. And so Philadelphia's parkland and natural areas, they were not done by the city for people's well-being as far as getting out into nature. They were really done as a last-ditch effort to try to save the drinking water supply. And when they realized that didn't work and they had tossed everybody out, they basically put a lot of artwork in here. And so Fairmount Park is just literally loaded with statuary that's gorgeous. And that's why to this day you can ride your horse, your bike, yourself throughout all kinds of green places in Philadelphia. So that ends our little tour. You can see how close we are to campus. I urge you heartily to make this walk on your own once you're allowed to come back to campus. And then also, right down there below us, make your way into that building over there, the Interpretive Center. It's free, and you get to see what the what the mechanism looked like. And again, social entrepreneurs, think about stuff. Why was that done? Is that water good for the people that are here? Could it be better? Those kinds of questions, keep letting them permeate your thoughts. And when you're able to go out and do your walking and exploring, let them permeate your exploration.